So Alabama versus Georgia round 2 in the national championship, a game that many people thought we could see even before the season started. These two teams have seemingly been on a collision course with one another, and now this is the second time they will meet. We need to talk about the keys to this game, break it down, give a preview and prediction. But before we do, as always, you all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes, N for no. Do you believe that the Alabama Crimson Tide will be able to repeat not only against the Georgia Bulldogs, but as national champions this year? Let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy the content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive to content creators, such as myself, and both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said, we've got a lot to break down, so let's go ahead and hop right into it. Because both teams are coming off of playoff victories that happened in different fashions. For Alabama, going up against Cincinnati proved that Cincinnati's secondary was absolutely legit. Gardner is absolutely a legit top cornerback in the nation. There isn't a question about it. But Alabama didn't have to go into their bag of tricks against Cincinnati. And in fact, against Cincinnati's 3-3-5, the Crimson Tide were perfectly fine just running the football all day, which me as an Alabama fan was very happy to see. Because sometimes the simplest game plan is the most brilliant one. And whenever you're playing against a team that has a solid secondary that Cincinnati does, but they're willing to give you the run, you take that all day long, especially when you hold the advantage in the physicality department, and that showed. Alabama didn't have to go into their back pocket and reach in to grab cards that they would have liked to hold for the national championship. And I understand Georgia and Alabama are teams that are familiar with each other. They've played each other, so Georgia does have the advantage of having some familiarity as opposed to if Alabama was playing Michigan, where Michigan wouldn't have had that personal familiarity with the Crimson Tide having not played them this year. Georgia has played Alabama, so there is that level of familiarity. But even then, as an Alabama fan, you have got to love the fact that you came out of the college football playoffs with cards still in your back pocket, and you didn't have to go into your bag of tricks at all. You kept it simple, you kept it safe, and you got out of the game. For Georgia against Michigan, that was a beatdown. Michigan was outmatched from the onset of that game, and they weren't really able to do much to affect Georgia. And it doesn't help whenever you're going up against the #1 defense in college football and you consistently turn the ball over. That's just making your job that much more difficult. So what can this game bring us? What do we need to look for? Well, we saw in the first matchup the ways Alabama was able to affect this game, and there is no doubt that Georgia will look to make adjustments. Now they have film, they've seen how they got beat, they are going to attempt to make adjustments. But that doesn't mean Alabama's not going to make adjustments as well. Alabama is going to continue making adjustments and exposing matchups that they like. So what are some of these matchups that I think we need to watch in this game? Well, for the Crimson Tide's offense, tempo is going to be the name of the game, and for Georgia's defense, the first area that I think is going to be the name of the game for them is discipline, and those two play off of each other, and let me explain. For Alabama's offense, we saw what tempo was able to bring against the Georgia Bulldogs in their first matchup. Jordan Davis has been lauded as one of college football's top defensive players and maybe the top player on Georgia's football team. However, he was pretty much, a non-factor against Alabama last time. At 350 pounds plus, when you're able to run tempo, when you're able to keep him on the field and keep him going, you can tire him out quick. And that's what Alabama was able to do. They tired out Georgia's front with tempo, and that's one of the areas they were able to kind of break loose in the game and keep Bryce Young safe. But we also need to understand, just running tempo for the sake of running tempo isn't going to be successful. Your tempo must be thoughtful, and it must be used to expose matchups that are going to be in your favor. For Georgia, I say discipline because we can always point to discipline. I'm going to talk about discipline as it relates to Alabama a bit later. That's something that we can always point to in football. But I mean, it's even more important when you're going up against a team that can do tempo the way Alabama can, especially with Bryce Young at the quarterback. Because whenever you're running tempo, it can put a defense off balance. But now when you put a quarterback that's an absolute magician back there, now a defense has to stay home and they have to stay true. And I don't need to tell Georgia fans about this. You saw an up-close and personal example of what Bryce Young can do and what makes him so special. So this isn't a conversation we need to have. Georgia fans very much well understand why the Alabama quarterback won the Heisman Trophy. He is that good. So discipline is going to be key. Luckily for Georgia, you have a front that many people have been lauding all year, and deservedly so, no doubt about it. But you also have linebackers that are really solid, and their play is going to be monumental in this game. Because if you're able to affect tempo and keep Alabama in 3rd and long, in theory, you're doing a good job. However, one thing that needs to be noted is Alabama has been sensational at 3rd and long. And even though Alabama would much rather be looking at a 3rd and 3, where their options are essentially limitless with the plays they can run, we also need to understand that this is a team that has showed poise in 3rd and long and been able to convert where otherwise a lot of teams wouldn't be able to. So where Georgia's defense would usually feel good going up against a team and having them in 3rd and 10, Alabama's offense is one that demands respect, and the only time you can feel safe when playing Alabama's offense is when they're off the field. That's the only time you can take a breather against Alabama's offense, is when they're all back on the sideline. Until that happens, they are a threat, and Georgia knows this. So that discipline is going to be key, because Alabama is going to aim to tire out Georgia's front, and then that linebacking core is going to be monumental. The other area we can talk about is the matchups in and of themselves. Alabama has 2 tight ends that are utter mismatches across the board in Cameron Latou and Jaleel Billingsley. But on the other side of the football, we also need to talk about what it is Georgia brings to the table in the tight end position. Darnell Washington is fantastic. Fitzpatrick is a great tight end. But Brock Bowers has been an utter mismatch all year long, and he showed what he can do in their first matchup. Brock Bowers is going to garner a ton of attention, and this affects the game in multiple ways. Whenever you have an individual such as Brock Bowers that has been as effective as he's been, it creates 2 problems. One, now you have to cover Brock Bowers. He's been a tough cover all year long, whether it be on a safety or on a linebacker. It's going to put the Crimson Tide defense in precarious positions, and that's going to be awesome to see how Pete Golding and company deals with that. But the other area it really affects a game is even when Brock Bowers doesn't get the football, you have to know where he is. And that distraction can open up things for other members of Georgia's offense, which is something I think they're going to look to do more this time around than last time around. Use Brock Bowers as a chess piece. Use him as a weapon, no doubt about it. Absolutely use him as a weapon. He's too good not to use as a weapon, but also use him as a chess piece. Use him as distraction to keep Alabama's defense off balance. But you remember when I just talked about discipline. Now it's Alabama's turn to talk about discipline for their defense. Henry To'oTo'o and Christian Harris, for the most part, played a pretty solid game against Georgia. And in fact, the Alabama defense as a whole played a solid game. But they are going to look to mitigate Brock Bowers more than they were able to last time. But because of them now knowing what Brock Bowers can do, I expect for Alabama to try and stay as disciplined as possible. Once again, that always goes without saying, but what are the areas I'm really talking about? Well, we talked about how with Georgia, whenever you're playing a team with the tempo of Alabama, you must stay disciplined. Likewise for Alabama, when you're playing a team with the mismatch at the tight end position, such as Georgia has, and then running backs that are effective out the backfield catching the ball, you don't want to get sucked into eye candy, because that eye candy can open something else up, and that's where discipline is going to be huge. Not only gap discipline up front, which is going to be major, we'll talk about that in a bit, but the linebacking position must stay disciplined, and downfield, assignments must be recognized. So communication is huge, assignments are huge, gap discipline is huge, but most of all, you cannot beat yourself with penalties, and that's something that Alabama has been bad with this year. Alabama has really hurt themselves in the penalty department, and sure, they won the last game against Georgia, even though pass interferences were coming out left, right, and center. That's not something you want to try and repeat. Something else I like for Alabama is the running game and what that can do. Now look, last time Alabama played Georgia, the running game did just enough to keep Georgia's defense on their toes. But this time, Brian Robinson comes in a bit healthier. Alabama's offensive line is going to be massively important, not only in keeping Bryce upright, because we see what happens when Bryce is upright. If you give Bryce Young time, he's finding an open receiver or he's making a play. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But if Alabama is able to open up the running game, that's going to cause a lot of problems. Because on the outside, I think Alabama likes their matchups. John Mechie is no longer here in this game, and that is incredibly unfortunate, but Alabama was able to still positively affect the game without John Mechie last time. They were able to still put up points on Georgia's defense and get the balls to other playmakers. So now that they've had another game without John Mechie, there are a ton of wide receivers who need to step up, who are going to be big in this game, but they do have options, and Jameson Williams is still there. So if the running game is able to open things up, Jameson Williams could be in for a big day because he is a mismatch. And much like we talked about with Brock Bowers, if you are Georgia's defense, you can get caught up in being so distracted in trying to stop Jameson Williams, you lose sight of somebody else. And that's something I think Alabama is absolutely going to try and do. I think they're going to give Jameson Williams a few different looks, things that they didn't show Georgia in the first go-round, and really show off his entire skill set. But in order for that to happen, Alabama's offensive line has got to remain strong against Georgia's defensive front. There's been positive news about Emil Ekiyor, and I haven't heard much about Chris Owens, but every healthy body is going to be important. Seth McLaughlin taking over that center position was really solid against Georgia the first time around, and he's only going to continue getting better. So luckily, he now has that familiarity with Georgia's defense, he now has that familiarity with the front, and another big-time game under his belt, only increasing his experience and familiarity. So Alabama's offensive line versus Georgia's defensive front is the third area I think we all need to look at, and that honestly should be number one in importance, because everything starts in the trenches. The last area we're going to talk about as it relates to this game is something I think both defenses are going to try and do, and that is pressure, pressure, pressure. Because as much as Alabama's going to go tempo, Georgia realizes that they cannot let Bryce Young sit back there all day. Anytime they did that, he picked them apart, putting up monstrous numbers against Georgia's vaunted defense. The problem comes with whenever you pressure Bryce Young, you're now putting a lot of stress on your secondary. And with Jameson Williams having the speed he does and Alabama having the playmakers they do, if they're able to break free, they can allow for some massive plays against the blitz. But it's all about if that offensive line can give Bryce enough time. The difficult part about going up against Bryce Young is his ability to make plays out the pocket as well. You can get him out the pocket, but you still must remain disciplined and make sure he cannot affect you. So your secondary has got to stay on their receivers and just hope that the front and linebackers can keep him from actually taking off and running, because he does have incredible elusiveness, something we saw in the first go-round, something I think will continue to be seen here. But I absolutely expect Georgia to up the pressure. We saw some four-man looks from Georgia. We saw them send 5, and then we started seeing them send 6 as Dan Lanning was looking for any way he could to stop Bryce Young. I assume in this game they're going to roll the dice much earlier on sending pressure and send it much more often. They were picked apart last time, and now this time you've got to do something different. So sending pressure more consistently is something I think we could see. But on the flip side, that's also been an area that has bit Stetson Bennett before. Because when Alabama is able to get pressure onto Stetson Bennett, that's where mistakes happen. Luckily for the Crimson Tide, Bryce Young isn't super mistake prone as in terms of interceptions. Only 5 interceptions on the year if I'm not mistaken. However, when we look at Stetson Bennett, he's thrown 5 interceptions against Alabama alone. And a lot of that has to do with how Alabama is able to generate pressure on Stetson Bennett. And this circles me back to something I said at the beginning, talking about Alabama's defensive front. Because Alabama's defensive front is really, really good, and I don't think they get the credit they deserve. We talk about Will Anderson all the time, and deservedly so. Maybe not enough even. Will Anderson is maybe the best player in college football, and he's certainly the best pass rusher in college football, yielding the most sacks, and it was just a travesty he wasn't invited to New York. I digress off of that. The interesting thing is you cannot get so caught up in stopping Will Anderson, you forget about Dallas Turner, because the true freshman is well on his way to an 8-sack season if he can continue the production he has been putting up against Georgia. He is a true freshman that I think will take an arc much like Will Anderson. I'm not saying he's going to match Will Anderson's numbers this year, next year. What I am saying is we're seeing Dallas Turner put up these numbers as a true freshman who didn't get to start the whole season because of Chris Allen being there and then Drew Sanders before Drew Sanders got hurt. Dallas Turner is a name that demands respect, and even if you're able to stop him, even if you're able to stop Will Anderson, Phil Mathis has been very, very good from the interior. So Alabama has ways to get after the quarterback, and we even saw the last time around they were successful in some safety blitzes. It's just about timing them. You have to make them unpredictable, and you have got to confuse Stetson Bennett at the line. Because anytime the blitz was fairly predictable, Georgia was able to pick it up and able to capitalize on it. It was when the blitzes started coming from areas that was not shown pre-snap that really affected that Georgia front and Stetson Bennett. So because of that, I think we are in for an absolute heavyweight matchup. I know a lot of people are upset that it's Alabama against Georgia, and I've heard I'm not going to watch that. However, I love college football, and I want to see the best two teams play. And if your contention is that these aren't the best two teams, I would ask you what two teams are better, because I don't see two teams in the nation that could put up a fight against either of these teams when they are in their best forms. In my opinion, these are clearly the two best teams in the nation, and I'm very interested to see what adjustments Kirby Smart and Georgia can make against Nick Saban. Nick Saban is almost perfect against former assistants, only Jimbo Fisher uprooting him this year. But you can imagine, Saban doesn't want to add two into 1 year, and he wants to keep his record against SEC East opponents as pristine as it has been. Georgia's going to look to try and topple the Crimson Tide, and they have a lot of adjustments they need to make from the first game to this game. But if you're asking me what I think is going to happen, simply put, and within a minute and 30 seconds, here's my last little prediction. I think Georgia's going to be very tough in the first half, but ultimately, Alabama's playmakers on the outside are going to be able to make plays and affect Georgia's secondary in a way that's going to be very hard. If Georgia gets from behind, it's going to be hard for this offense to be able to make that up. Stetson Bennett hasn't been asked to come from behind very much, if at all, this year, except against Alabama. And so it puts Georgia in a position they're not comfortable with. So at the end of the day, I think Alabama wins this game by 10 points, giving Alabama their second national championship in so many years, and beating the Georgia Bulldogs twice in the same year. Hop down to the comments. I cannot wait to hear what you're thinking about this game. That's it. See ya.